Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here again with you all. Some of you I met yesterday evening. On behalf of the INSEAD Hoffmann Institute, which has been partnering proudly with the Stewardship Asia Center, with Rajiv, with Arno, and of course our partners WTW and the Straits Times Group, in bringing to you this fantastic list of 25 steward leaders every year. So once again, I do want to congratulate the 25 steward leaders we've recognized this year around, and to say a big thank you for the very inspiring work that you do. We've had a really exciting and inspiring session already this morning. Dr. Kiran Bedi, I've had my fangirl moment today. I think to paraphrase the biopic that you were talking about, which is coming out, the name I think you said was The Name You Know and the Story You Don't. I know the name and I know a lot of the story, but it was still so wonderful to hear from you. So thank you for exemplifying steward leadership for us. Now, what we want to do in this discussion is to build upon some of the ideas that have been talked about so far. As the previous moderator said, build upon the bromance that we saw develop between Shai and Rajiv in terms of discussing the ideas of profit with purpose, values and incentives. How do you marry the two, and can it even be done or not? So to help us, I think, to decode a little bit of that, I have two wonderful panelists. And they both represent, organizations with a long history, all sorts of ups and downs as any organization will have. And I think they can then share with us from their personal examples just how businesses can build long-term, sustainable and inclusive but profitable growth. So that's what we want to talk about now. Before I introduce the panelists, I do want to say that I'm going to ask a few questions, but then I'm going to leave a lot of time available for your comments and your questions. Ask the provocative questions, ask the burning questions that you have in mind, and feel free to challenge anything that's said here. I work with MBAs at INSEAD, and no session goes by without some challenge being put to the professor in question. So it'll be very boring if we don't do this. So the impetus, the onus for how interesting this discussion will be is entirely on all of you, not on us, right? So make sure that the questions and comments come in. And if you're shy about speaking on the mic, that's fine, but do send them in through Pigeonhole. Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce our two wonderful guests. We have with us Mr. Bey Soo Khiang, who is the Vice Chairman of RGE and Chairman of April Group. I'm sure a very familiar face. At the RGE Group level, he oversees sustainability policy and practices, continuous improvement and digital transformation across all business groups. Welcome. We also have with us Ms. Tai Sook Yee, who has nearly 4 decades of experience in governance and leadership across family business and multinational organizations. She's been with TPC for nearly 18 years and has led various business units, including as an advisory board member of OCTAVE Institute, which focuses on transforming business leadership to be a force for good. Now, they have stellar careers and have wonderful achievements, none of which I've done justice to with that introduction, but their bios are available to you. So do please take a look there. Okay, so to start us off, I think I'm going to come to you first, Soo Khiang. As I was saying, between the two organizations that you represent, I think we have more than 160 years of history, right? Now, at the time that the RGE group started off, I think 57 years ago, the focus of business managers was very much on maximizing shareholder wealth, right? At least, that was the common thought. And to the point that the panelists in the earlier session were making, it was all about, business profit being created, cash being generated, maximizing shareholder wealth. Fortunately, over time, and certainly in the last few decades, perhaps we've been forced into this, but the focus has started to shift towards what we've been trying to talk about all the time with steward leadership, which is the idea that we have to optimize multiple stakeholders. Now, how is that something that you've managed to do in RGE, especially given, and I'm going to address the elephant in the room, I did say we will be provocative, given that the palm oil industry has been associated with all sorts of issues. There have been concerns around excessive deforestation, habitat degradation, etc., which you've managed to overcome.
Well, morning everyone. Good to see familiar faces, and always looking forward to come and renew friendship here. And getting inspired as well, Dr. Bedi, thank you very much. By way of background, RG is a group of companies dealing with bioeconomy business mostly. In other words, we grow trees, which absorbs carbon dioxide and emit oxygen essentially. The trees are now taken to manufacture commodity products like paper products, clothes, and so on and so forth. The other vertical we have is, of course, the palm oil, which goes to produce a lot of food as well. And as what Dr. Rao said, it's quite a controversial industry, so to speak, right? I joined RGE in the year 2011. And then already the shareholder, Mr. Sukanto Tanoto, was really asking his companies to operate on a 3C model at that time. Good for community, good for country, but then you'll be good for the company. Of course, I did not just read it, I actually went to visit to see for myself on the ground what they do, right? And from an environmental point of view, they were already at that time, they've adopted the high conservation value forest concept. So, when they convert concessions to plantations, they actually conserve the high conservation value forest. So close to about 40% of the forests are conserved, and the plantations are then created around these conservation areas to protect it. Now, this is more than what the legal requirement in Indonesia requires, which is 10%, right? So when you fly over, when I fly over, I see a mosaic of plantations where the conservation areas are connected, to facilitate biodiversity movements. And, their first annual report on sustainability came out in 2003, for the year 2002. So clearly, sustainability practices was really embedded then. Right? And from a community point of view, I visited their community development center, where they focus on elevating poverty in the communities around through education, empowerment, and enhancement, right? Education is really improving the schools in the communities and improving the quality of teachers as well as principal. And in terms of enhancement, empowerment, really bringing the adults, the farmers, to teach them better farming techniques so that they improve the yields and the income can improve, and even providing access to market for them. And some would like to be entrepreneurs, so they teach them how to manage trucks, and then subsequently give them contracts, to take the wood from the plantations to the mill itself. And enhancement is, of course, access to clean water, health facilities, and so this concept of doing good for community was really embedded. So I asked him why did he do it, and his comment was very simple. He said, when you operate in a remote area in Indonesia where there's kind of an absence of government, right, you need a social license to operate. And you must make the people around the community see the benefit of your business for them. Right? Only then would they welcome your business, right? And of course, from environmental point of view, you need that certification or license to be able to sell the products, access to market. Hence the need to really focus on doing good for community, country, then it'll be good for company. In 2015, so I joined in 2011, in 2015 we took it a step even further. We made two major commitments. One is zero deforestation. That means we'll no longer convert any forest to plantations. And the other major commitment we made at that time was a 1-to-1. That means for every hectare of plantation we have, we want to have 1 hectare of conservation area. And actually before that, he has already instructed me to look at certain production areas, to buy over them, and then convert them into eco-restoration or conservation license, which we completed the process in 2015 and announced it as a real ecosystem restoration. And on top of that, there was that commitment from him for US $100 million over a decade to really fund the operational activities, conservation in the conservation areas. So there were clearly commitments, along that way. Of course, 2015, you had the UN SDGs as well as the Paris Climate Agreement. And we started looking at the process of embedding the UN SDGs into the way we do business, right? There's clear overlap between the 3 Cs and the UN SDGs. But a significant thing, it also happens in 2017 when we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founder. We crafted a new purpose statement at the senior management level. We expanded the 5 C's to 3 C's to 5 C's, community, country, climate, customer, then be good for the company, right? And we polished up, sharpened the core values. And then we started the process of embedding the core values into the way we do business, to the extent that 20% of the assessment of the people are dependent on their core value assessment. And in 2015, we were already doing the continuous improvement, so once a month for a week, the mill will be doing projects, and during these projects, we use them to firstly eliminate waste, which is raise sustainability practices, as well as embed these core values into the way to do business. So that's how they have been evolving until now. And from the time I joined till the time now, the asset value of a company has more than doubled, and so the profit also has more than doubled. So, when people tell me, sustainability, social community is a cost, it doesn't show up, right? In fact, it shows up as continuity of business, long-term profitability growth from that perspective, yeah.
Well said. And we get blamed in the business school environment for liking our acronyms and 3 C's and 5 C's, but we've had the C's all
and
through,
3
right?
E's, and 3 E's.
Indeed. Well, so thank you for sharing that. While from what you're describing, of course, the evolution has been profitable, as you said. It's been a win-win situation. But I can't imagine it was easy, and it's certainly not the kind of changes that you make quickly, right? I mean, it requires changes in corporate culture and at all levels, certainly at the senior management level, leadership level, the board, and at every aspect of the organization. So perhaps coming to you, Soo Khee, how have you seen this happen at TPC? Have you been able to bring about that same kind of change in culture? Again, given that you have a 120-year-old organization, which can sometimes have baggage along with legacy.
Well, 120 years for the family business, but 18 years for me, so that's a fraction.
Right.
So I think from my perspective, listening to Mr. Bey, that's really commendable. I'll take it from a slightly different angle, culture. Culture is something that is probably a little bit less tangible, harder to get grip with, and yet that has really been the focus. So 4 generations of business, and if we look at it from a time horizon, the business sustainability has been driven by different needs of society over that time horizon. And the 4 generations has been evolving by looking at what are the needs of society. So the focus has always been to serve society needs as part of the business model. And we have certain principles about how we serve society. And one of the principles that we have is that we do not go into markets and take out existing players. We always want to integrate existing players inside, and we grow into growing markets where we are able to offer our values in those systems. But just coming back a little bit into culture is that in the 1990s, the current 4th generation steward, which is Frederick Chow, when he actually took over the business, he questioned sustainability and he questioned about business. And one of the things that moved the business forward at that time, which was serving globalization and Asian industrialization, we are actually at that time and still today pretty much very heavy in industrialization as well as in the business of maritime business and industrial shipping and logistics business. So that is again another business that is, has a lot of carbon footprint that needs to be addressed. So, but he also found that, I won't go into the technicalities of all that, but he also found that it is very important that if we don't shift the business leadership's way of thinking and the business leadership way of measurement, I think that we have talked about measurement today. Measurement and our values are very correlated. It is not one after another, it is actually going hand in hand. it doesn't get the business sustainability change very far. The culture change starts from the leadership. So in 2004, as a business leadership team, there was a declaration that we were going to adopt a new business mission, and that is to serve, at that time was to serve human needs and create wealth at the same time. So profits are important. How you create profits is even more important. Adding value is a core of everything. Today, we have evolved to say that we are serving human well-being and creating wealth at the same time. So when we serve human well-being, we are continuing seeing the needs of the community and society rather than marketing what I can produce. And I am evolving to serve the needs. And when I add value, I will make money. So we leave the making money to the system to reward us back by adding value. It doesn't take away the need for efficiency, effectiveness, process change, and so on. But one of the lessons that we learn, and we are still learning, is that culture shift, which is people, has to be supported by process, structure, and today we are also enabled by technology.
Indeed.
Well, I'm fully with her on this, right? Because I talk about us inculcating the core values, you know, but the need for embedding the concept of 5 C's throughout the organization is something we needed to do, you know. So in 2019, we started the process of crafting out a 10-year plan to 2030. We call it the business. In this case, we started off with April 1st. April 2030, you know, where we form a steering group and then getting the leadership in the various departments that are relevant to decarbonization, managing the landscapes, you know, community development, as well as the mill operations itself. To lead task force, you know, and the task force comprises various levels of leadership, different agenda, as well as ages, right? And for them to really craft out their plan for the next 10 years. We didn't want to go to 2050 because we want to have a direct line of sight for the existing management to 2030, right? Because some of them may not be around beyond 2030, you know. So we crafted that, you know, and the steering committee will push them to a more ambitious target. They will push back to have something more realistic. So the push and pull kind of arrive at what we call the 2030 plan now, with very clear targets established and KPIs as well. Then we embed that into their performance contract, right? Which their performance bonuses and all that depends on it, right? And we did a public launch within town hall, within the mills and so business, you know, to kind of communicate it across the board.
Right.
And many people, the young people especially, were excited about it. You know, so that's how we kind of embedded, and of course we have periodic review 6 monthly of the journey during the year, where are we going, and tracking that is following the path. You know, so there's a lot of accountability there on the part of senior executives. You know, and through that process now, that has become a way of life. You know, whenever we talk about business, we also talk about sustainability. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now I did say we were going to make this a little provocative. Now we've been talking all along about sustainability, you know, doing well by doing good, etc. But if you read some of the press that's been coming out in the last quite recent times, I think since about 2 years now, there's a lot of discussion around greenwashing, even green hushing, you know, people beginning to step back from their commitments, big organizations beginning to say that, you know, they're becoming more reticent about commitments that they're making because they're seeing there's too much, either there's too much scrutiny or perhaps there's concerns about backlash from shareholders, etc. So I want to ask you now, as business leaders, I know this here we are preaching to the choir and everybody's, certainly talks about sustainability, ESG, but when we look at evolving global trends, till a few years back, the terms that would always come up would be technology and sustainability, right? Now, in the last few years, when we've done the same kinds of surveys, a lot of these surveys have still talked about technology, but sustainability seems to have gone back a little bit. It's all AI, ESG has taken a step back. Do you see this as you go out into the business world that you work in? Have organizations started to step back a little bit on their ESG commitments?
Well, I do see some
And
of
I'm sorry,
it.
I'm going to ask you to keep your responses brief so that I can get
I
them.
do see some of it, and my sense is that, we have moved from hype-driven commitments to a more circumspect, measured commitments now. People are beginning to realize that, commitments is just not words, but a lot of actions and finances involved. Right? And for public listed company, over the years, inflation has gone up and so forth. So shareholders pressure on them. So there is some degree of backtracking. But I think we should also look at companies, like us who are in fact doubling down on environmental commitments. For instance, we are now assisting financially some conservation areas, Orangutan Survival Foundation in Kalimantan. Because some step back of donors, they are short of finances. And we have been kind of helping them in the last 2 years, right? And we're now talking to another foundation as well, another conservation areas. So, and in China, we are doubling down. We started our third 3-year contract with CI to continue to scale up the work they do in Poyang Lake reservoir areas. In terms of conservation of wetlands as well as conservation of biodiversity in areas. So what I'm saying is it's all not bad news, but they are good news, right? And this forum is a very good example of why we should continue to do it, because there are positive examples, the SL25s and so forth. So let's not look at the laggards, but look at the pathfinders, so to speak. Yeah.
Perhaps it's become more about, the conversations about sustainability have become more mature. Maybe we've moved away from the storming to the norming part of it, right? So we're settling down, we're beginning to understand how that might move, and that makes
If I could just
sense.
very quickly put in a little bit on that. I don't think sustainability has gone away. I think sustainability is always there, but what I've observed is that that word has actually been distilled into what needs to be done. ESG has been novelty for a while, and ESG has been something that people need to get on the bandwagon. I need to be part of it, But now I think, like what Mr. Bey is saying, quite a lot of it is actually grounding. And when it comes to grounding, it's not receiving so much attention. And at some levels, there has also been some greenwashing. So there also probably has been some levels of what I would call a little bit loss in faith. That's what's been happening. But yet, actually, at the operational level, quite a lot of it is actually grounding. And it's less sexy. So the next thing that might be coming up is not ESG, I don't know, your 5 C's, maybe there's going to be another 5 E's and 5 C's coming up. I have no idea, okay?
Yeah, but when you talk about environmental alone, you can be very hype about it, but when it impacts on social, then there's the consequences, right? And I like the examples of the Singapore government when it talks about sustainable aviation fuel mandate, right? If you really look at it, it's 1%, right? Many critics will accuse it of greenwashing, right? What 1%, what effect it's going to make? But the fact of the matter is that as the government, they have to consider the impact of sustainable aviation fuel costs on the competitiveness of the aviation hub, which creates jobs for more than 160 people and contributes about 6% of the GDP to Singapore. So it's not a small matter from that perspective. Every percent counts. But that is a measured approach towards sustainable aviation.
And since you talked about Singapore, there's a question on how can Singapore business move beyond sustainability and build regenerative business models. The idea of going again a step ahead and sort of just but regenerative business models and incorporating that into every aspect of your value chain. Suki, what comments would you have on that?
So I think I'll just bring in a little bit outside TPC. So I do work in TPC, and I think that's it's very important for that re-education of business leadership for reformers today too. But when I sit on boards of listed companies and we look at ESG and we look at ESG regulations, in essence, I think that it forces the companies while it is needing to comply to innovate. and to actually come up with new business models. So either we choose to tick the boxes or we choose to really change our business model. That is something that is of a choice. So regenerative business models is just another way of saying what kind of new business models needs to be built to respond to needs of society. And you're regenerating, and regeneration today cannot be independent of green. I mean, that's my opinion. And I do not think that any organization today can actually say that, oh, we don't need industrialization, but industrialization in your new business model, adopting technology, needs to have a new way of approach to industrialization, construction.
Yeah. So 2 examples I have, because when we made the zero deforestation commitment, the question often asked, how do we continue to meet growing demands? Right, obviously one is growing the use of the trees in existing land, which you have done so, to the tune of 30%. The other really is looking at circularity, right? How can we go out, take textiles and recycle it and produce recycled pulp, which can be added to the virgin pulp, for production. So we've invested, in SUSTEC, in NTU R&D setup to help us design an urban fit textile recycling plant, which will do that. The other regenerative business model is taking waste, right? Sustainable aviation fuel, the feedstock is really our waste oil, our residual oil, and even used cooking oil, right? Which we collect from customers who buys our oil. Those are feedstock that goes to make sustainable aviation fuel, which helps to reduce carbon emission in the aviation industry.
Talking about business models, there's one interesting question on this one which I want to ask you. So in both the companies that we have represented here, the stewardship leaders are family leaders. Would you see this as a competitive advantage in your ability to have steward leadership compared to listed companies? And I think that's something that that's a very interesting question.
I've spent about 11 years in SQ, Singapore Airlines, and now I'm into my 14th year in RGE, right? Clearly, there is advantage because in private ownership, right? Because when I joined the company, I'm quite sure the founder will continue to be around for the next how many years. And therefore, his mantra of 3 C's, which we later refined to 5 C's, will continue to be there. And I can, with confidence, take it and run, and try and improve on that. In a public listed company, I'm not so sure, because the CEO will change, the board will change, and I'm not sure the direction after 5 years or 6 years, right? So private company do have an advantage in that sense, or family business, Okay.
Suki, if I might now, take a step back from this conversation about organizations and evolution of thought in terms of how businesses feel. Talking about your journey as a leader, your personal journey. When you look back, what are some of the perhaps mistakes that you might have made when you look back at your career, or how has your own evolution happened as a leader who has understood now the sort of what is required for the future and what our planet and the people who call it home need for leaders like you to take steps towards?
I'm going to try and keep it short because I'm seeing
that
the time is coming up. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm an accountant by profession. In the 1980s, I actually spent 2 years in New York. And when I was in New York at that time, one of the things that I learned is irrespective of where we are, who we are, what culture, what gender, in every space in this world, there is every society that needs, the needs of humanity is the same. So there are people who are collecting rubbish in the city. There are people who sit in corner offices in New York, as well as in Singapore, as well as in KL. When I came back to Asia and back to Malaysia with the intention and the patriotism and the novelty of saying that if its citizens of the country don't come back when the country is developing, then how is the country ever going to develop? So I chose to come back to want to contribute and also to be closer to my family. But what I found was that the financial system which I was in was actually very demoralizing. I was part of a system, that was creating money and listing companies and taking over companies where the shareholders have got no intention of delivering the business models that I was selling. So I chose at that time to come out of the financial system into businesses, and I actually settled with 2 family businesses. Now, I find that it's not that multinationals have got no value, they have got a lot of value, but family businesses have got grounding and have got alignment vis-a-vis value, legacy, and succession planning. And it's easier to align. We can talk about this till the cows come home, but I find that there is very different ways of working in family business and very different ways of working in multinationals, but it all boils down to what am I true to myself in wanting to hold. So I'm just going to stop here.
Okay.
Zero.
Yes, that the time is looming large. I think so. We will wrap this conversation up, perhaps just by reiterating that developing the kind of sustainable and resilient growth that we are talking about is perhaps a bigger business challenge and a humanity challenge today than it's ever been before. So it is going to require the kind of steward leadership that we've been talking about all of today, and it's also going to require not just individual and collective action, but collaboration. Right, the idea of public and private partnerships, the idea of international cooperation beyond cultural and geographical boundaries. And I always want to close with the idea of respect, mutual respect. We talk about the global south and ideas coming in from the west that get imposed upon the global south, certainly in the context of your business. We've seen the EU regulation regarding, if there was ever deforestation, then that kind of fuel is no longer considered sustainable. Various equations like that. But the idea that this has to be done with humility, it has to be done with mutual respect, and with an awareness that we are going to get some things wrong. I always say that the accounting regulations that we take for granted today took hundreds of years to develop. And so it's okay to improvise. It's okay to understand that this is an evolving equation. As long as we do it together and collaboratively, hopefully we'll save our planet and the communities we influence. On that note, a big thank you to both of you for being here and for your candor.
Thank you.